I might later sound biased, perhaps in a direction you didn't expect. I myself am a product of homeschool 1st through 12th and been observing the outcomes of adults who were homeschooled for years. Some common bonds I found were not upsides. The upsides, first and foremost, were very bright individuals. I saw no deficiencies in their book smarts. Interestingly, I found amazingly high concentrations of homeschooled young adults in religious organizations. I think the main reason parents decide or consider to homeschool kids is disagreement in the ideals that are being taught in the public or even private schools. Sure, I get that. But here's an opportunity to instill resistance at home. Teach them the ideals you value from right or wrong at home and set them in the wild. They're going to go there eventually anyway. Let them receive what school has to say, even if it's in contrast to values at home. Guess what? They'll learn to distinguish their own values from the oppositions that will be everywhere. As an adult, notice at every turn, your values are attacked, right? If you're right or left. You can only shelter children from opposition or discomfort so long. Keep going, and you will only fail to teach them how to process. When is it that you're going to give them freedom to think and not just what you think is best? Is homeschool just an excuse of censorship? Absolutely share what you value, but don't make it law. Let it be a decision they can make, and for you to practice and demonstrate your ideals if they actually indeed hold value to you, as a salesperson would persuasion. The later you postpone children thinking for themselves, the odds are the higher for resistance, the higher the rebellion. I guarantee you. Once you let them think for themselves when they're 18, that's too late. You'll predictably see them resort to explore the reverse of whatever it was that was forced upon them. Not a coincidence you see pastors having some pretty rebellious adult children. You think, what happened? If you force them to live a life of reluctance and read them out before it gets there, expect most rebellious of alternative you can imagine. Likely it'll happen in the late teens first. Middle school, high school, are you there to memorize metallic bonds? Sure. But more importantly, social formation for the rest of a life. Inconvenient truth, some pain now. Those evil other kids. Hearing concepts I may disagree with spends a long way to maturity. We learn very little about life by comfort. I'd almost say homeschool your kid if they have a life-threatening ailment. They're physically unable to do whatever. But if they can walk and breathe, go to school. I'd almost say let them get their shells cracked by the environment there is in school. Bullies, assignment expectations, talking to girls, guys, all of it. If they decide to go on a path of an ideal you laid out, guess what? And to your delight, they'll reject an outside teaching at school because they chose your team, because you lived your belief effectively and persuasively outside the irony of do what I say, not as I do. Plus, there's a special power behind making your own decisions, perhaps even more so as an adolescent, if given the freedom simultaneously behind the demonstrated encouragement and salesmanship of at-home values. Let me give you the counter, the nightmare scenario that is not appraised hardly ever for the sad outcome it is. I've seen in my case studies children who were rigidly told what to believe. I've seen in my case studies children who were rigidly told what to believe, closed off from the perceived evils of life, some necessary evils, like other kids treating them badly, and that it exists. When you're the magazine cover homeschool parent because you spared your children hardship and pain, don't pat yourself on the back. You spared them in childhood only to delay the distress to adulthood long term because the processing was postponed. And prolonging their expectation of your parenting, you've led them to expect and rely on far outside a normal nurturing age. You end up with shaky, terrified, insecure adults doing dry heaves throughout college because mom, the teacher, isn't instructing. This particular case was mine. This is actually my story. It's caused me to grow sympathetic to other cases, younger cases, that are much the same. I'm sympathetic, but will still point out the cause and effect, however painfully necessary. The characteristic of prolonged dependency. Oh boy, this is a big one. Let me just preface now by saying, if you're not a parent now, or way too much of a parent, you'll be a parent most of the rest of your life. A lot of parents slip into this unnecessarily prolonged responsibility because, well, my kid, he or she is special. This is universally true unless you have some detachment issues. His or her development is unique. There are some cases where that's true, but far, far fewer than are claimed. We have to see more often that you made that kid and who he became by your brand of development. And way too often in homeschooled kids, especially in those who have been homeschooled all throughout school, fail socially as they transition to adulthood. Let me share with you a list of common denominators in my case observations. Oddly, a big phenomenon. They don't learn how to drive until middle to late 20s, 30s, in some cases even later or never. They fail at friendships because they're just too painful because of the venture into the unknown. You might say, well, young adults are all awkward. Homeschooled kids are generally significantly more so because they were denied the development skills you can't fake at home with a table of non-strangers. Another point, they are high anxiety, and because of this, they are burdensome to many because they remain so dependent. They were granted too much special attention at school that they depend on it to function. And as an adult, it tires out those around them. They will treat others poorly in response because of the subconscious reaction in discovering they are not special, as in the world they were cultivated. The free lunches are gone in the real world. That extra 5 minutes they used to get doesn't exist anymore. Sadly, they aren't helpful to themselves and not helpful to others. They internally might blame themselves. They time out quickly because of overwhelm in a world they were accustomed to adapt to. Another point, they become lazy and unambitious because of the loose discipline of homeschool. You didn't have to do it like all those other kids. You were separated from the herd. There's not a way to avoid implanting this because it's a reality. Maybe even a false sense of superiority in some cases can arise. I'll give you an example where all these mechanics come into play. I knew a homeschool 25-year-old girl, and she had yet to learn to drive. A creative group would often volunteer to pick her up to join their group. One volunteer would drive out of town to get her. She'd arrive there, put in 10 minutes of whatever the creative project was, and she would park herself on a chair away from everyone. It was too much. Being isolating was more familiar. She had trouble connecting in this way. She could only talk at people, much the way a presenter on stage would speak to an audience. Audience input is not expected, nor is it processed to be responded to well, because control is not what she was taught to have. Yet there is a dual dynamic where she's creating her own stage to be appraised on, but with no certainty she will be accepted. Though the attempt is exhausting for every reason, she's in a different world with little self-awareness that others will dismiss as arrogance or entitlement. She would almost, I'd say, only respond with fun facts to those interacted with, as if to demonstrate what she knows. Like it's one of the keys to acceptance. Not being enough may often be in forefront on her mind because, yes, all programming and upbringing. She's doing what she knows. She's doing what was done to her, being told what to do. Missing a social life as a child is such a big development loss. Are homeschool kids smarter? Academically? Sure, I think so in general. Public school kids, they develop different areas that make them more effective and dangerous, if you will, in the real world. Not nearly as reserved and postponed in some cases. Even public school kids will experience some of these things because of scalebacks and screen usage numbing. Parents often don't blame themselves. They would first self-victimize. A lot of parents bask in the credit of homeschooling from other parents. I took a more noble path for my child. I sacrificed work hours to do this for my child. This valor is dangerous for reasons I don't need to lay out. It's about the child at the end of the day, not a pursuit of parent. Is the child going to do better being sanctioned from the rest of humanity? They'll eventually have to join. I don't see a way. Often built is a more painful joining where the wall eventually ends. Problem is, you could have been civilized with it. When you finally meet it, it's too late and it's a stranger. Retreat to where you were seems most comforting. Now you live in an antisocial lifestyle to cope for things that you were never invited to process. Because there were so many free passes and things done for the child student in the prevention of pain, there were many things they will grow up to not being able to fathom doing or can't do well, even in an unspoken way. The people who cross their paths will be met with, please do this for me, a continuation of what the parent has set forth. In another case, my case of the 25-year-old girl was from Wisconsin, moving to an isolated example way out in California. There was a case of a 24-year-old young man, also homeschooled, who had yet to learn to drive or apply for a license. But he also had a chronic issue of paying bills on time. His landlord would usually get paid near the middle of the month, every month. His refuge was always isolating alone in his room after putting in some short scattered hours at a part-time job. Anxiety and fatigue after tasks was something he admitted to me. The 25-year-old girl I mentioned also had a small part-time job that seemed to overwhelm her. She missed many days. You typically hear these symptoms stemming from a tough, difficult, or abusive parent. An absent parent or a too available parent, I find, yield a shockingly similar result. These ailments in adulthood are from overly nurturing parents. Overly simplistic example, and when the sun comes out, are you okay with your kid getting burnt? Why is that? Because metaphorically, they were never allowed outside. Sun reaching them for the first time becomes hard. My case samples had incredible knowledge of random facts, history, things I never knew. Their knowledge amazed me, but there were so many common cues missing in their social intelligence when interacting with others. They were fast to go silent and look down in shame, but the response they wanted to give was not within them. Thankfully, they were forcing themselves now as adults to do things socially with groups that I'm hopeful these gaps will continue to fill in. My advice, as a product of a homeschooled individual myself, if you are homeschooling a child, force in social opportunity like a long-distance hiker needs water. Thank you.